All right. Lots of eventful day. Never a dull day. I'm just waiting for Jeremy to, wait, he's here again. He's trying again. I have two Jeremys.
Hello.
Oh, here we go.
have
Do you want to
Two of
be?
me because I'm gonna need to share my desktop, and that does not have a camera or audio.
Okay, I'm gonna make you a co-host on all of your accounts. So whatever you end up sharing.
Okay, this one doesn't need to be shared, I don't think, but thank you.
Okay. And then Troy, you're also a co-host just in case we need you. And I will call the meeting to order 3:30 p.m. And I will do a roll call. Carol Deely. Oh,
Here.
okay. I'm here. Dr. Powers. Hi. Mr. Hillbrands.
Here.
And Mr. Voigt.
Here.
We're all here. I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Second, I'll do a roll call. Deely.
Here.
Is yay. Hillbrands.
Yay.
Powers.
Yay.
And Voigt.
Yay. Ms. Ma, I don't know if I can edit the recent minutes you sent to me to keep notes.
It says you can. Oh, I have it sent. I sent to your Gmail. Do you want me to send it to your?
Oh yeah, I don't know how my personal one got sent or got out
I'm
there
sorry,
somehow, but
yeah.
that's okay. It's not a big deal. I just
Okay, I just sent you, and I'll edit because I know you're going to be presenting a lot. So if we work together, I've been editing so far, and I'm going to make a motion to approve the minutes from March 4th, 2021. Have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay. I'm going to put that as Troy seconded. We'll do a roll call. Deely.
Yay.
Ma is Jay. Hillbrands.
Yay.
Dr. Pars, I wasn't sure if you wanted to.
Yay.
Okay, and Mr. Voigt.
Yay.
Cool. 5 out of 5. I'm editing the wrong ones. Hilarious.
I'm trying to get there too.
Sorry, it's not in the, here we go. I think I shared Jeremy the wrong ones with you. Hold on, let me try this. It's okay, it's recorded, so I can go back and edit the right ones, and I unedited the other ones. Okay, so that being said, our first order is the is the budget. So I put that first. I figured that's our most pressing issue. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Powers and to Jeremy.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Hello, everybody.
Oh,
I'm going to have Jeremy put up a slide deck just to kind of go over an overview of where we are right now and possibly where we're going with our budget over the coming days. And as soon as we have that up, I'll be able to walk you through that. Very good. Okay. Next slide, please, Jeremy. Looking at a quick overview of where we are. All of our 115 funds, which means our SBB and our SA funds coming from respectively CPS and the state, were encumbered by existing positions. In addition, we had approximately $700,000 in additional position-related costs that are encumbered, but we do not have budget for in the 115 funds. This is compared to approximately double what the budget gap was last year. And this is due primarily to the fact that the teacher salaries went up 3% this year, and there was not a corresponding or equal amount of increase in our student-based budgeting, unfortunately. This has often been the case, but it was more dramatic this year than in past years. We are looking at several ways in which to close this gap, including cost savings through retirements and resignations, and also reassignment to other duties, closing positions, consolidating, realigning positions, and funding positions through alternate sources. So we're going to walk through each of those with some broadly estimated figures, okay, at this particular point. And we still have a couple of areas where we don't have all the information we need yet with regard to our options. First of all, cost savings through retirements and resignations. And I'll say this also includes one position that is being moved, one staff member who is being moved from a teaching position in general ed to a teaching position in our diverse learners program. So that new position, and I'll mention that a little bit later on, is for diverse learners is going to be filled by a teacher we already have. So that position is off our regular teaching list in terms of that particular teacher. Anyway, we have several different people who are either moving away, resigning otherwise, or retiring. And if we fill those positions, some of which are fairly high costs, as you can see there are 3 positions that are 6-digit costs, and this is salary and benefits, total combination. If we are able to fill those positions in a more modest way, let's put it that way, not necessarily, highly experienced teachers, but teachers who have some experience or are at least extremely well qualified, then we can realize potentially a cost savings of between around $91,000 all the way up to potentially about $108,000. So that is just with no changes in the actual positions themselves, but replacing teachers who are leaving or otherwise being reassigned. Jeremy, you want to go on to the next one, please? We're potentially going to be closing 2 positions. And the reason I don't have a position number there is this is to be determined, let's put it that way. And we're still waiting for information on some other options. These potentially can be filled and funded through other sources, but we're not quite there yet, let's put it that way. This would be a savings of, if both of these positions were closed, of approximately $225,000. Next slide, please. Making some changes with regard to a couple of existing positions, reducing them from 52-week positions to 39-week positions, could realize a savings of approximately $43,000, or one or the other or both. So that's why we have the figure there of 25,000 something and 18,000 something. We could go for both of those, one or the other of those. So there's a range there of between 18,000 and 43,000 potential savings. Next slide, please. Looking at alternate sources, we are probably going to be able to see or be able to account for some reductions in our accounts budgets, as well as an increase in enrollment and decrease in our free and reduced meals percentage free to free up additional funds for personnel. This all depends on those changes, but with an estimated of about $350,000 that might be realized in that way as a savings. Our current internal accounts surpluses can also be used for personnel. And these, of course, have come from a number of sources. And at the moment, we have approximately $662,000 in internal accounts. Not all of those are, most of those are funds that we can access if we need to. And for potential rentals, again, we're looking at if we're able to reopen with rentals, and that's all up to CPS because we've been closed since March of 2020. It will be For example, if we're able to start with the beginning of the school year, even if we're able to fully realize some of our rentals, it'll take time to build that up. We won't necessarily have all of our former groups we were working with, like our churches, for example. We may not have all of those to begin with, or we might, anywhere from $200,000 potentially up to $500,000, which has been typical of what we've been able to earn for the school in our internal accounts through rentals and leases. Okay. Next slide. We're making changes to the fee schedule, nothing dramatic particularly, but we're looking to eliminate the freshman fee, which we find is really not as necessary as it used to be. It was largely used for things like retreats and so forth, and we've long since eliminated some of those more expensive activities. So we're eliminating that. We're looking to add a $100 tech fee, which will be for all students, and that would be to support our one-to-one computing and support the needs for maintenance and taking care of and replacing our Chromebooks, which will be issued to all students. We're also looking to make some changes here on the fees, kind of reorganizing it a little bit, and we do have a draft of it. And thank you very much, Sarah, for providing us with some comparatives in some of the other schools in terms of how they handle their school fees. I find that looking over those and our own, there's a lot of similarities. Our general fee is actually, which we're going to change from an activity fee, renamed to general school fee, is actually lower than a good many other schools, but we do have some additional other fees, especially tied to specific course areas. Next slide. Okay, this is some other related matters. We are going to have a translation and interpreter service line item. So we're working now on estimating how much that will be so that we can continue the work we've started with regard to providing translations and interpreter services. We have received a position for a diverse learners teacher, and one of our teachers in general ed is moving into that position. That's one of those ones I listed earlier as being vacated. And we are also picking up an additional case manager because our caseload has reached over 200 of students who either have an IEP or a 504 plan. So our one case manager we currently have, we'll be adding a case manager. Those two costs come from ODLSS and are not part of our school budget. We are probably going to, once we know exactly how many students we're receiving through selective enrollment, with the additional emphasis on having students available, greater access for students who have IEPs. Forgive me, my voice is a little hoarse today. If indeed those numbers pan out the way they look like they are, we'll be appealing to see if we can get an additional special educator, diverse learner teacher for the resource program. That's the high incidence programs. And finally, we did receive a pretty significant allocation of funds that are designed to support students in their post-pandemic needs in terms of academic and social and emotional. However, we have not yet received guidance on the usage of these. I've specifically asked about guidance in a couple of different specific things, how it could be used, not looking necessarily for the entire document at this particular point, but in terms of how we might be able to utilize some of these funds to assist us in realigning some of our staffing, and at least for the coming year. Now, the difficulty here is not a difficulty. We have to do this 1 year at a time, essentially. But the bottom line of this is probably going to be a one-time thing. It'll be at this level. We've been told there may be additional funds in a following year, but not necessarily the same amount, not necessarily as much. So we may be pleasantly surprised that we do get it for a second year. But right now we're just planning for the 1 year. And that's something we're waiting to find out about. And I think that's our last slide, isn't it, Jeremy? Okay. Any questions at this particular point? This is still very much a work in progress. We still have, I need to find out and still waiting on additional word with regard to how we can use those additional allocated funds. Haven't heard back yet. I've asked a couple of times. Someone has gotten back to me saying, yes, we're working on it, but we haven't gotten the word. And the other part of it being, we have a meeting tomorrow, Jeremy and myself, to go over with the budget people, some other factors with regard to how we address certain budget related situations. And hopefully we will get some clarity from that, which will help us make a few additional changes that will provide us with some savings. So right now where we are is we have a range of actions we can take that'll help reduce that gap. But the remainder of that gap is going to need to be covered by internal accounts as it was this year and as it has been in the past. Now, typically, and I'll say this in all candor, relying on internal accounts for positions is a necessity and not necessarily a something you want to do. In other words, it's something that may have to be done, does need to be done, but does not necessarily it's not necessarily something you would rather do. You'd rather do something else with that. You'd rather be in a situation where all of our allocated funds through 115 cover all of our positions. That simply isn't the case, and it hasn't been for quite some time. We are not quite as heavily leveraged as a number of other schools have been. I've talked to a number of our counterparts in other schools, in selective enrollment and elsewhere, and some of them are more leveraged in terms of their internal accounts. Where we've run into our biggest difficulty is the fact that we lost a lot of income, and that income is primarily through our rentals and leases. That all ended essentially after March of 2020. If it resumes in the fall, or possibly even during the summer, then I think we will see a gradual ramping back up again. But it may take us a year, it may take longer before we're able to realize the kind of income stream that we have had leading up to this particular point. So that's kind of where we are right now in terms of our overview. Questions, comments at this particular point before we go on to the fee schedule and so forth?
Yeah, I have a few questions. And you had mentioned that you thought the enrollment might go up and based on, I don't have it in front of me, but was our number based on 1970 or 1976? I saw that they gave us an additional 6.
No, it's 1970.
1970.
What we're based on. And we could go a little higher than that if it's lower. If we come in below projection, it's hold harmless. We don't lose any funds. But
what is your thought? Like what are you targeting a certain number above 1970?
Well, the first thing we have to do is to see how the selective enrollment and the CTE shake out. In other words, the invitations have gone out last Friday. We have to see, for example, what the percentage of acceptance is. And then that will give us an idea of what our baseline with regard to our enrollment. In other words, taking the existing enrollment for 9 through 11 and adding the incoming freshmen, CTE and selective enrollment. But we also have, and by the way, our 19 seats for principal discretion are part of that. In other words, we calculate that into our total freshmen. We were looking for a freshman class somewhere in the neighborhood of 475. Now, if we come in higher than that, it means more money. If the total comes in higher than 1970, it does mean additional funds. In other words, if we have 10 students beyond that, that's somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't have that number. Jeremy, what was the per pupil this time? 5,
the per pupil for FY22 is $5,958. Okay,
so basically call it $6,000, close to it. If we had 10 more students, that's roughly $60,000. That's a big difference. If it's 15 more students, you can do the math from there. However, I want to be cautious about those numbers though, because I won't say we're overcrowded, but we don't want to go too far beyond. We're past our ideal capacity, but we're still absolutely functional. But
So-
at the same
so-
time, we can add some students, but we don't want to overdo it.
So it's not like you're trying to get more than, 1970 is a great number. If it stays that way, you'll be happy.
I'll be happy, but it would be nice if we could get additional funding, additional allocation. We also have our transfers as a possibility. We've received quite a few requests for transfers. Our typical transfer numbers, we try to gauge based on kind of a replacement level. In other words, we have students who have left and our school population has gone down. We try to use the transfer numbers to spread that out over those grade levels as best as possible. We don't like to have grade levels that are dramatically different from each other. Right now, their ranges are basically 470 to 500. So that's close, fairly close. So we don't want to have a situation where we have a grade of 350 and another one of 500 and something, that type of thing. It just makes staffing and scheduling difficult. So we could add easily to more students.
What's the window for accepting transfer students?
Well, really, we've accepted the applications. Troy, our application deadline was last week, wasn't it, for transfers?
Yeah, so it's kind of a two-step process. The student applications were due on the 16th, and then we gave an extra week to any teachers or staff that needed to get those in. And we've even extended a little bit just to make sure we have as much information as we can.
Yeah.
And then when do you accept the transfer student?
We'll start working on those right away. And the budget's kind of kept me away from those figures at the moment. But we'll start on that, and I'm hoping to get acceptances going out. I think we decided on, well, initially it was going to be by this Friday, but it's not going to be. It'll be probably a little bit later in May, hopefully somewhere around the third or fourth week of May. We also have this factor too with transfers. We generally try to stick with the application window that we had. Occasionally, however, something else comes up. We have somebody moves into Chicago or in some other way, comes in late to the game. And then we have to consider, number one, do we have space? Does the student look like a student we can accept, and so forth? And we have on occasion have had emergency transfer requests from other schools, where CPS requests that we take a student who's had difficulty, not academic difficulty, but maybe social difficulty in another school. And we've done that periodically over the years, averaging maybe one or so a year.
And is the transfer process done through CPS Go?
No,
Or is it,
it's done directly
it's done
to the
locally?
school.
Okay,
Yeah,
it's done locally.
directly to the school. And then we do pretty much for that the same thing that we do for principal discretion. Basically, I write up for each student that we would like to offer it to, the reasons for it. In other words, a little bit of a summary and so forth. That goes to CPS. They check it, goes specifically to Tony Howard, and he looks over it, sees if there are any issues. I sign an attestation that nobody has paid me to do this. And I'm only laughing a little bit because I think some of that was happening some years in the past at some of the schools, or, in some way saying, hey, if you let my kid in, gee whiz, you're going to get a new, track or something, I don't know.
Yeah, you're gonna get new turf.
Yeah,
So-
we don't really have anything like that going on.
For the minutes, you had said 19 seats for principal discretion. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
That's
yeah.
correct. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. And I'll put that in the minutes.
The number we get is based on 5% of the students who are accepted through selective enrollment in the current freshman class. So we were at 21, I think, or 22 last year. This year's class was a little bit lower than the current sophomore class.
And my question was, based on this concept of potentially having to close 2 positions,
Mhm.
but without the enrollment actually changing, how do you know where that is and how will it impact class size? That that concerns
Mhm.
me, that's all.
I probably should have used this expression before we even got started. The axiom for reducing expenses in a school is to make reductions, make cuts as far from the classroom as possible. In other words, at this particular point, we're looking at very, very slight reduction in teaching. In other words, we're probably looking at a vacant full-time position, perhaps being a half-time position. Now, depending on our numbers, it could end up we're able to close the whole position, but only if we can manage it in terms of our class sizes in that department. So the positions we're looking at are away from the classrooms. And again, I don't want to get into more specifics at this point because it is a serious issue, let's put it that way. But we're making our cuts as far from the classroom as possible with regard to personnel.
Yeah, I think when we bring this to the LSC, when you bring this to the LSC, you'll need to be as specific as you possibly can, or we can go into closed session, but
If we get very specific about specific positions and individuals, we will have to do that in closed session.
right. And because for at the end of the day, like you said, it's about ensuring that it's a student-centered budget.
Mhm.
And for me, I don't know what that means, making cuts that don't affect the students, because I don't know, I don't have the information. So I'm not trying to
Sure,
pretend like I'm trying not to fill in the blanks.
right.
But that to me, I think is, I would need some more information on that. And then, well, I wrote all these notes. Do you have any, based on the discretionary funding, and you said it in the town hall is $125 per pupil. Do
Right.
you have any ideas what you would want to do with that money?
Right now, especially the larger amount of the two, which is the one, there's I should have this in front of me, but we'll use round figures.
Okay.
$250,000 is to specifically support students in social, emotional, and academic needs as a, catching up with or addressing those things in the post-pandemic setting. That would and can, I hope, include a personnel position because you have to have someone who is actually doing those things, who's taking the point on it. So what I have asked is, can an existing staff member be assigned to that area of responsibility, be given that portfolio to deal with, essentially changing that person's focus, and at least for the coming school year. If it goes another school year, that's fine also. But right now, we're just focusing on the coming school year. So that's one thing we would be doing. The other area, and then there would be ample additional funds for outside resources and things of that sort. Would still be a significant amount of money available. Perhaps as much as $100,000. The other part of those funds was for after school or outside of school hours time to support interventions for students. Now, this is one where we really have to know who our students are coming in, especially our incoming freshmen, especially those with IEPs, to determine whether we have outside of school, including summer potentially, and or after school interventions for students beyond what we've been doing already. There are also within that stipends for existing staff members to act as kind of the point people for those. They're relatively modest stipends of $1,000, but that's, if somebody wishes to help organize after school tutoring or, review session type things or that type of thing, then we'll have some funds available for that. But again, I think this is still being viewed primarily just for fiscal year 22.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking, the way you had mentioned you need to know who your students are. So potentially by strengthening the MTSS process,
Right.
you'd be able to catch some of these kids that need more interventions or tutoring or.
That's right.
So and that's also our CIW people. This existing staff member, Are you thinking would be more academic focused or more counseling focused, or you're not sure yet?
Don't know at this point. At this point, we're not even sure we can use that for a personnel position.
Mhm.
But given the large amount, basically $250,000, I would anticipate that they're thinking that, yes, you have somebody do this as their primary focus, and the rest of the funds are used for the actual services themselves. Both the ones in that particular bucket and the ones for the after school or summertime things. Somebody's going to have to take this on, and like I said, as a portfolio. And we've got staff members who I feel very confident could do this, who could step aside and we kind of reassign duties to other people. There's going to be some shifting of responsibilities, I guess you might say. Each of us is going to be having a different package of responsibilities.
And if other people have other questions, I have kind of one that's in the back of my head, which is, and I want to be, sensitive to people's time, but in the last LSC meeting, I know you weren't able to be there, but the equity committee had put forth a recommendation for kind of like a dean of students or someone that would be, again, if someone else wants to jump in here, to help. I can't remember.
Or climate and culture related.
Yes, climate
roles,
culture related.
Uh,
And either it didn't have to be a new position necessarily. It could be sent to an existing administrator, or and I just didn't know if that was reflected in this budget. You had mentioned translation. I saw that in the fees.
It isn't, and the reason it isn't at this particular point is because we have the potential for another way in which that can be funded, separate from this budget.
Okay.
And this is through the whole school safety and security committee. Funds, CPS is looking to be able for us, if we have a plan in place and we have a good solid recommendation for a role like this, to free up some of the funds that have been involved with, in supporting our school resource officer program. That's still a process that we're going through. Mr. Mitchell is heading that up at this particular time. And if indeed that is something as a possibility, that could be our means by which we could have a position like this with a very specific mission to work with the administrative team, or this maybe even within the administrative team, to work on climate and culture related issues. So it's out there. I won't say it's on the horizon. It's just kind of off to one side there. We've been given the indication that yes, funds can be available if we have some good proposals to go with that. And I believe
June, like a June timeframe, right?
I'm hoping by June, it has to be able to be brought to the LSC for approval for the plan. It's just that everything else has been going on here, and we're not quite there yet. We will be. And that, unlike the additional allocation we got, that is intended to be ongoing. That's my understanding at this point. So in other words, if we bring someone on board for that type of function, we have the expectation that we'll be able to continue with that.
Okay, and then I think I'm gonna, obviously, whatever you send us, look at it and then prepare more questions. And then if you get back to us based on your meeting tomorrow with downtown, you had mentioned that you're not getting the teacher salaries are going up, and you're not getting the adjustment to cover that. And that was a big problem at my previous school, like a huge problem. So I don't know if there's any appeal process for that.
Yeah.
CPS problem.
Yeah, it's a CPS problem. SBB did go up, but it didn't go up that covered everything. It just didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, we should have been able to cover our existing positions all up and down the line at the same level we were able to cover them at least this year, but we weren't. It's a considerable bigger gap.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I have one more question,
Sure.
which is, you mentioned that the budget And maybe Jeremy, I don't know, that the budget line items for the departments was gonna be adjusted.
Yes, that's
Can you
correct.
speak to that a little bit?
So we have started working on a budget spreadsheet, which is tweaking some of those numbers to try and free up more funding from the internal accounts. And that is where we came up with these numbers, if you can see that slide.
Yeah,
So, and just to kind of clarify what Dr. Powers already said, that second bullet point is referring to current internal account surpluses that we could see potential use for personnel. It is not our entire internal accounts amount,
right.
which is over $1 million out right now, I believe. This is just accounts that we've identified as their activity fees. There's a chunk of money in there, or there's still some building lease income, or there's a few different random accounts that have always been intended for personnel funding, because it might be students paying for summer school or a test prep program, which would naturally go toward personnel funding anyway. We've paid for it already somehow, some other route, but that is what that money is intended for. So that 662, that is strictly surplus amounts that I've identified. And it's also as of today. If certain departments decide, yeah, I'm going to use the rest of my 10 grand I have in my department account, which they can do, they have a few more weeks to finish their spending and do that, then those numbers might go down, but that's where we're at as of today. The top number is more what you're speaking to, Sarah, in that we have done some changes. We've gotten rid of some accounts that aren't really used from year to year anyway. We have looked at potentially decreasing department budgets and such, and that's where we've come up with that 350. That's not including any rental income that could potentially happen. That is 350 that we've cleared just through fees and stuff and lowering numbers in other areas. Does that make sense?
Yes, and none of that 662 or 350 is excess fees that people paid that we didn't spend yet, like gym uniforms or.
Some of it is that stuff, yes, but it's not. So it could be like gym uniform. Like right now, I think we have $27,000 in the PE uniform account. Naturally, some of that will go toward paying for PE uniforms next year, but we don't need that much money in there. So there has been a buildup of that account.
Yeah.
And so some of that could be used for personnel if the LSC is willing to do that.
Okay. Does anyone else on this call have some questions before we move to fees? Anyone? No, you guys. I think, I was looking at the agenda, but I think we should go to the fees. I didn't see any check requests or anything. Oh yeah, Miss Park, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I am. So Alexis Conrad and I were talking about the science department budget because we do have, and Jeremy, I need to follow up with you separately on this because the ledger you sent me doesn't match my records in terms of how much we have left, because from my records, we have about $6,000 left for this school year. And so I wasn't sure if next year, because we usually start with about 16,000, we clearly only spent about 10,000 this year. And so is the plan for next year for our department budgets to be like topped off to the 16? And so we'll start with the 16,000, or is it going to like roll over? So it's that 6,000 plus the 16,000, or is that not yet determined?
Do you want me to answer, Dr. Powers, or do you want to?
I can answer that. Thank you. What we've done, Heidi, is to go through the department and some of the other program budgets and see where, for example, if we typically have set department budgets based on what I would call normal and typical expenses during the course of a year, rather than, in other words, it's been a baseline budget as opposed to a zero-based budget.
Right.
And as a result, we have found that over a period of years, we've had, in most departments, not all, but in most departments, we've allocated more than was actually needed. So essentially what we're looking at is going to what is actually the much more typical or normal expenses and setting the budget at that level for the department, and then using the additional amount to roll back into that internal account surplus. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to cut everybody off at the knees, not by any stretch of the imagination. But, you know, for example, if a department has been receiving, let's say 15,000 and they never spend more than 10,000, then that's 5,000 we probably will not allocate to the department the next year. If there are additional needs, as always, things come up, then they explore ways in which to be able to meet those.
I guess we're asking also because we were talking about how this year we did spend a fair amount of money on online platforms.
Mhm.
So like in the science department, we bought the Gizmos licenses and the Vernier licenses. We got some other stuff funded through FOJ because it wasn't approved vendors for CPS, and we're hoping that things like GoFormative do become approved vendors for CPS so that we can pay them through our accounts. And so if we are thinking about using those platforms for next year, is there any way we can, like, I guess, allocate some of this year's remainder budget for that kind of stuff?
It's a little early to know at this particular point, quite frankly. I mean, if there's a specific amount that you feel like is going to be needed for supporting some of those purchases that were kind of unique this year that we're going to continue on with, then we need to have that built into the budget itself, and maybe make adjustments elsewhere. In other words, if that becomes a priority, then let's move that into the allocation that you would receive for your department. There are going to be purchases you can make in advance, like Jeremy was mentioning, that will, you know, reduce some of that budget. I'm hoping people will not feel like they have to go on a spending spree, because the money is still in the school. It's not like 1 to 15 funds, which we, you know, roll back to CPS, in which case this year we have 0 would be rolling back to CPS. It's still Jones money, let's put it that way, so that we could dip into that if necessary. But I think we're going to be seeing a reduction in each of the department budgets and some of the program budgets, but down to levels where it's been much more typical expenditure. It's going to be a little tighter this coming year.
Okay, so maybe Alexis and I will need to have a separate meeting with you, Dr. Powers, to kind of discuss the science department and our needs specifically. And then I did just have another question related to the budget in terms of positions. So science right now, we have 3 people doing overtime, or like 1 extra class.
Yeah.
Are you anticipating that still for next year? Because we did try to hire a half-time last spring, and then with the pandemic and everything, we didn't. And so I wasn't sure if any of that had been part of the personnel number calculations.
It is, but kind of off to one side. Mr. Hesselton, of course, is working on the master schedule at this particular time, and I've asked him to check on each of those positions. Science, I think you had 3 positions. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have 3 people.
3 overtimes. Yeah. I don't know that there'll be 3. But I think there's still going to be some in that area. A couple of other departments, we had a single overtime, and they're not going to be needed this coming year, those overtime lines. So we'll see a reduction overall. I think, Jeremy, correct, we had 5 OT positions.
We did. 1 was diverse learners, 1 was math, and then she's correct, I believe 3 were science.
Right, and we're trying to reduce those down, but again, keeping the number of sections and the class sizes in mind. So science, I think, is going to have something. It's just a question of how many sections we actually need.
Okay.
Yeah, and this Dr. Powers kind of points to my question about the org chart. That's kind of where I was going, is to kind of get a feeling of, is there overtime? Like, I didn't even know there was overtime, so thank you for bringing that to my attention, Heidi. But just to give not just myself, but the council members an idea of what they're looking at when they're looking at the budget, you know. So I think it would be really helpful to see that, to just always make sure it's a student-centered budget.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And if I could just clarify that with regard to those overtime
Yes.
for teachers. We have, over the years, found ourselves in a situation where we needed one extra section of something. And usually the situation with science was unusual in that we needed 3. And under normal circumstances, we would have hired a half-time teacher. But with the pandemic, with the remote learning, it was with the willingness of our existing staff to take those on, they picked up a 6th section, which is paid through overtime. So it's unusual that one department had 3 like that. Typically, we'll have a scattering of 2 or 3 across the entire curriculum. But again, it's usually, we just need one more section. And this, you don't want to go out and try and, we can't hire somebody for one section. We can only hire full-time or half-time.
Well, and also with science, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe Heidi, but they're kind of different disciplines. So one half-time teacher might not be able to do all 3 of those sections.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we do have flexibility in the science department because different people can teach different courses. It was just really hard to find someone willing to do a halftime last spring, especially with not having any idea what the fall would look like. So,
And that's a challenge in every department, finding a halftime person willing to do halftime.
Right. Okay.
but I do think having 3 overtimes is not sustainable for the long term. So I just wanted to check.
No, it isn't. It was definitely a stopgap this year.
Great. Is this a good, are there any more questions or can we transition to talk about fees?
We're ready to go.
All right, let's do fees. And I'm hoping we can be done by 4:30. But I love talking about fees, so. Jeremy, would you like to present?
Sure, and let me find my other slide again, just to kind of talk about. So on the presentation Dr. Powers just was doing, basically the main points that we wanted to make on this draft of a fee schedule, and I emphasize the word draft. This is obviously what we've changed and come up with, but we welcome any input, or if people have things they'd like to see that make it look different, more clear. Ms. Deely has already reached out and she had a couple of thoughts on it, and I welcome those. But ultimately, we haven't really changed much in the way of the fees for the amounts of the ones that you are still seeing on here. Primarily this first one, the $400, what we used to call our activity fee. That one, we have changed the name to try and make it sound less. A lot of my feedback and questions I get from families are, my child wasn't in an activity or they weren't in sports, so why are we paying this $400 activity fee? So that's trying to clarify that a bit. We've also broken it down a little differently so that you can see where the actual amounts are going to. And I gave those dollar figures. We could take those dollar figures away if we think it'll help people swallow it more. I don't, this is just my first draft of it. Below that, there used to be a $50 freshman fee. We've decided to take that out because Dr. Powers, as he pointed out, there's no longer, that program doesn't quite exist the way it used to, it seems. And then to help ease the tech fee, which would be for all students now and at an amount of $100 a year. We base that $100 off of research that Joanne has done, working with the Chromebooks that we're already getting from CPS, working with some of the other sources we might be able to pull from to get sort of a base of Chromebooks. But as an ongoing fee, we feel that's about right. I think for cost alone, we'd be looking at maybe $75 per year as an average. However, with warranties and all the anticipated damages, breakage, problems that the students are going to have, we think 100 is a better plan for that amount. The PE kit fee below that is the same, and it outlines what that is. It's also trying to be prominent that is strictly for the freshman class. And they carry that over to their sophomore year. And then below that is a breakdown. And then if you'll see the italicized parentheses after each line item, you can also see that that's how I'm trying to explain which ones would get waived if you qualified for the waivers and which ones would not. So the table here is primarily the same, except we've added those waiver information. This AP exam fee, I should double check that before we post or communicate to anyone. I'm not sure if they will raise those fees this year, and they may not have made a decision yet on that. And this year and the previous year, that was a moot point anyway, because they were both covered by CPS, but it should be on the fee schedule because I don't anticipate they'll do that a third year in a row. That is about it for changes. Ms. Deely pointed out a couple good things. The sports team fee is always a little confusing. At Jones, we apply it after the seasons have begun, primarily because there's a lot of students who anticipate being in a sport, but they can't. Maybe something happened or an injury or whatever, or there are actual tryouts and they didn't make the team. So we usually add that fee afterward. It is confusing to parents, so this phrase is supposed to try and clarify that a bit. But again, I'm open to suggestions. I always get the questions no matter what. I thought maybe if we had a quick outline of fall fees being added by this date, winter fees added by this date, spring fees added by this date, it might help families understand better. And then the other items we were discussing was making it known somewhere on here that they can pay online, or the ways to pay, to add those somewhere on the schedule. The only concern there is it's getting a little tight already. It's not a lot of space, and I prefer keeping it to one sheet. Any questions on that? Did you want to see the other school breakdown, Sarah?
No, it's
The-
okay.
the-
It's
The
okay.
work that you did? Okay.
Okay, so one quick feedback would be athletic fees, it's per sport. So if you play more than one sport, you're gonna have to do that more than once.
Okay.
I know you like to keep it to one page. This could be the summary. You could have a second supplemental page that, like you said, had the dates. Many of the schools had multiple pages and it was really nice. They had like FAQ, and all these can be paid on Aspen, correct? That's how I paid my fees this year.
I'm doing a quick review here. The only ones, they all can be paid on Aspen, but some of them are not initiated unless the student asks, like an instrumental rental fee, for example. You know, the band and orchestra teacher might ask students who wants to do this, and they have a form, and then it later gets added to Aspen. Or the same with the calculator fee. We wouldn't add that unless somebody came to us and said, I want to buy it through the school. And that has
Right, but when they do decide to buy it, it goes to Aspen, correct?
possibly.
Possibly. Okay, so we should.
The
we
math
need-
department kind of runs that show, and he usually would give me a list, but I don't know if they have a little slush fund up there that they're using. You know, that's not how they're supposed to do it. But yes, it should go through Aspen.
Yeah, because that makes it so much easier to track and
Yes.
and for the history for the parents. Okay, so I could put this in the chat too. This is for people not in the budget committee. This is the link to the fees that I did some research on, and some schools had really laid it out well, and some schools didn't have it on their website. So it also could be just the fact that it's the end of the year and people are gearing up for the next year, and maybe they're revising and they took the fees down. It's interesting, like, so some of the, Lane and, it's like that 400 standard fee, activity fee. And then some schools break it down by grade level. So like ninth graders pay differently than a senior. And so in one sense, that's really clear that you know exactly what you're paying. Like I'm very familiar now with this fee sheet, so I'm comfortable with it. But when my initial, it was, you're like a freshman parent and you're on overload and you're basically like, I'm just going to go to Aspen. I have no idea what's happening. If the $100 tech fee is for every year, why don't we just make it a $500 general school fee and include the tech under there? Is it just you're just trying to make it easier to stomach? I mean, you're already itemizing it. I don't know. I think if people see $100 tech fee, they're like, oh, I can just go buy a Chromebook for $300. And so I'm a little bit, I don't want to say just Chromebooks, because does it also cover projectors? And does it also cover, like, I still don't have a really good feeling like how much Jones collects for fees and how much is, and where does it go, right? So like,
Mhm.
when I look at the balance sheet for internal accounts, it's like $260,000 for fees. It's still in there. I don't know, but you know, how much has rolled over from the previous year, how much of that is earmarked, what percent is earmarked for purchases we're still making, you know, how much of that is for freshman uniforms, you know, like I just,
So, I mean, my response would be, in an ideal world, student X comes in August, they pay their 400, their 100, their 50, and their 2 class fees of 80. We have that money in August. We disperse it exactly the way it's laid out on this sheet, and that is our clear, awesome budget for the year. But I think we all know that doesn't happen.
Doesn't happen.
So we can't tell them you can't come to school in September if you don't pay your fees. And as such, really people can pay their fees however they want to. Again, in an ideal world, it would be great if we knew, you know, even 60% of our families are going to be paying on day one, and we can start working with that money, but we don't even know that. So that's why I think it makes it very difficult to give you those hard figures that you're looking for. And even itemizing it like we're doing here, I'm doing the best I can with, you know, estimating, okay, this is what we spend on printing and paper and postage based on the bills I've been paying. But 50 is a rough number. I mean, it's a kind of random guess. One year we could have 10 more mailings than a different year. So it's never going to be perfect.
It's never clean. I guess I just want to show the LSC that the money, you know, that it is actually, we do actually spend it. You know, I just wondering why our internal account level is so high. Is it just because it's rolled over? I mean, it's 267.
So in response to that, I would say, because if we depleted the entire internal account, like right now, I gave you that figure of 662,000. Those are current surpluses I would identify as surpluses that could be used for personnel. Let's say we burned up all that this year. Then we have nothing to start their budgets with in August. And that is very problematic. So we need sort of this cushion, this middle area, to be able to build those budgets for next year. And that's sort of happened over time. I would say even when I came into it, it wasn't quite like that. They were just sort of spending whatever was in the account at the time, and there wasn't even a budgeted amount. So this is sort of trying to create a little more organization to that. And that's why each department has a very definitive amount of what is in their budgets.
Okay, and this personnel funding, the 100, what is that? What was your?
That is some of the money we're talking about to try and cover this gap that we have in our personnel.
Okay.
Same with the department. I mean, a big chunk of that $400 fee goes toward the department funds and their budgets.
Yes.
And in another big chunk would go towards some of the personnel that we are not able to fund. So we're just trying to be more transparent with it.
Right.
It feels like this year when we did that, it was frowned upon a bit, or it wasn't, you know, the way that.
Well, I think as long as it's planned, right? I mean, it wasn't planned this year because you lost all that rental income, right? And that's potentially, that was going to pay for personnel. I think a lot of schools, majority, pay for personnel through internal accounts.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's poo-pooed. I just think it's about the planning, right? So,
Right. And if I
yes,
could add
Dr. Powers.
too on that, we would prefer from internal accounts for personnel that it be coming from our rentals and our leases. In other words, that's an income that's not necessarily coming from the students, it's coming from outside organizations. So that's what we prefer, that portion of it, to support personnel, but we don't have that right now. As that builds up again, the general school fee will probably have a lesser importance with regard to personnel. I did want to point out one other thing with regard, and this was requested in earlier discussions, And that is we've added language on the fee sheet that's a little clearer in terms of the free and reduced lunch form, or the FIIF form, and also payment plans and appeals, all of which are part of it. And we wanted to make sure that people understood that, for example, circumstances change. Somebody fills out the FIIF form in the fall, and in January they lose a job or something like that. Then there's an appeal process where we can waive some of the fees. And the same is true with regard to the payment plans. I can pay it, but I can't pay it all in one lump. So Jeremy helps and works with people to create payment plans. So we've tried to keep that a little bit more clear cut in here as well.
Okay. Yeah, fees are tough. And yeah, our sports fees are a little higher than other schools. I don't know if that's just because of the busing. And our PE kit includes the lock, right? So different people say different things. Yeah. So it is what it is.
I will say with the athletic fees, Sarah, every year we have to go to Friends of Jones for support on transportation. That is one of our biggest costs. And some of the other schools do have fees this high or even higher, but some of them have football and some of the more expensive sports too. So this is it's been a very slow growth getting up to the level we are at right now with those. And we haven't changed for several years now.
Yeah, it just depends on the school. We have between 50 to like 150 for sports. And yeah, for example, that was ours. Yeah, like for Lane, it's just $100. It just doesn't matter what year you're in. Obviously, these numbers are based on the cost that you've incurred for varsity sports and what you offer as part of the varsity sport that other schools might not offer.
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have any more questions on fees.
Does anyone have any other feedback? I mean, I'm making notes, so we'll adjust this and we can send out another draft. Or
I just think on the tech, maybe make it, if it's just for Chromebooks, that's fine. But if it's for other tech in the school, like how do you pay for projectors, or are teachers still paying for their computers out of their department budgets?
I mean, in general, again, I would say this tech fee does cover, it's her, let's call it her entire IT budget. And so projectors would fall under that if she needed to purchase more projectors. So, I mean, I could break it down more and not just use the word Chromebook. I guess my thought behind that was, if I say student issued devices or tech equipment or something, I didn't want the students to not realize you're getting a Chromebook for this.
Yeah,
like I
all
wanted that to
non-waiver
be more
students
clear.
can cover student issued Chromebooks. You could maybe tighten that up and put miscellaneous tech or I don't know, just like, I think that would save you getting criticism for like, oh, I'll just go buy my own Chromebook,
Yep, and I could see that as a possibility too.
Yeah. Cassie put okay, so Heidi asked a question, does the environmental science fee include APES?
AP Environmental Science, is that what you're asking, Heidi?
Yeah, because more of our students take AP Environmental Science than they take Honors Environmental Science. And so
I believe all environmental science classes get the,
okay.
I would have to look, I'm sorry. I
That
thought,
should be clarified, if it's all of them or just honors or whatever it happens to be.
got it.
Right, do they pay 40 plus the 95 is kind of what you're saying?
Well, the 95 is an exam fee, so it's definitely not the same as the class fee.
Okay.
So let me see if I can try and clarify that a bit more.
I said assessed to all participants regardless of waiver. Okay. Of course, we'll have to get this put in Spanish. So that for sure will happen. This, Cassie said, we do need to say on the fee form whenever possible, students, parents cannot afford to pay a fee. They won't be denied educational activities. Something of like the process for check-in. That's what was always talked about. Like, yes, you can, but you have to check in. So we know. So for example, you won't be denied going to homecoming.
So yes, Dr. Powers sort of alluded to it, but after looking a little closer, there isn't a lot of verbiage about the payment plan or the appeal process. So I will get more of that added in here.
And that could be on that second page, you know, like all the
Sure.
details. because they do.
I just hesitate with that because they already don't read all this. So, you know, I get what you're saying. I can make a supplemental, I guess, to go with it, but
it's I don't want to say this, but it's a way to cover your booty, you know,
Yeah.
because you're just very explicit about what you're asking.
We'll see what we can do on that.
Yeah.
See what we can
yep,
do.
I have that in my notes too.
Okay. Any other questions on fees?
I just wanted to make a comment, as if I could, about when we introduced our student fees during registration. Right at the beginning, and even when students would come into, or mostly the parents would come in for freshmen, and beyond that, it's the students that come in. But we encourage them not to pay any of the fees at the beginning, and to see if they qualify for the FIF form. And I think maybe we could even expand some of that language there as well. One of the clerks, Lori Torres, does follow up with pretty much every family just to confirm that, you know, if they didn't mean to apply for it, do they want to apply for it? And that's always an option for them to come in and apply for it again or get a different waiver for it. But I kind of, lastly, going on Jeremy's note, there is a balance of like, and how do you do that with something like this? I don't know if maybe it's a video or something, but there's a point where people just check out and don't read the information, even though if it's presented. So this is something that since I got here, and I'm sure is a constant problem across different schools, is presenting the information and having parents and students read it, and if they have any questions, following up with us. But a lot of times I find that most of the questions I'm answering, even within the same email, where the answer is, they're asking the question of certain different things. I mean, it can be fees, it could be sports, it could be anything, but they're just not reading the information. So I don't know how.
Yeah, it's a lot of information, right? So like as a school or business owner, whatever, you're always trying to just say it in a different way or produce in a different medium so that you reach all people, and you just, you know, try not to get too frustrated saying the same thing over and over and over again. It's just part of customer service.
But I'm just curious too, when you were looking at these different fee structures at different schools, did you notice any language or anything that they were using, or mediums that they were using, like videos or charts or info design that broke it down further?
I would say that the school that I thought had and it was Lane that I thought had done a good job was they talked about it, and then you could go down to more detail where it was all on a table. So it's like they kind of put we have these fees, and then like if you really wanted to know all of the fees that you would be assessed, and like how you can do the form, but again, I was doing research for it, so I was really looking for that detail. But no school did a like, hey parents, here's your fee, you know. But you could do like a little PR campaign as far as getting that form done, and like you said, doing the form before you decide to pay the fees. I think that is a good message that maybe, you know, it's very overwhelming and you're excited to join the school, you know, and so you don't want to not turn something in on time because you don't want to lose like your you know,
Well,
Is
and
it-
maybe that's a good reason we do have more wording at the top saying that this is not prohibiting you from coming to school, or, you know, these are the steps you need to take if this is too much or overwhelming or whatever. And we encourage you to do the family income information form. I mean, we kind of say that already, but again, it's,
You know, like having the checklist, new student checklist or new, you know, those kind of things to go through are never bad. I'm just laughing because I'm a process engineer, so like I like checklists, but not everyone thinks that way. You know, just because my brain is linear, you know, doesn't mean that other people might need other.
I thought it was interesting too that some of these schools, especially Peyton, break out their student fees. I do like that. I kind of, but I'm just curious, like, if they break it down in such detail, or would it be bad to like just refer people to a live website that they could dig more for more information? Because I mean, even like with seniors coming in, you know, you'll have a parent that will have questions about their fee structures, and then they'll pay something, and then they'll get to February and like, well, I already paid this. Well, those are the school fees, and these are the senior fees. And you know,
Right,
we
that's
break that
why I
down,
did
too.
like how Peyton did, like, okay, your senior fee is $575, but it includes graduation and it includes transcripts and college application mailings and, you know, like,
And-
like, oh, okay, cap it
and I'm
down.
totally open to that. The reason we've not done it that way at Jones is because it seems like every class has a different scenario for graduation or prom or whatever it is they're working on. I mean, these wouldn't be prom payments going toward prom anyway, but that, I think it just varies a lot from class to class. And that,
Yeah,
like this year, you know, Soldier Field's a totally different ballgame than what auditorium theater would have been. So it's hard to give them a fee now and anticipate. That's why we will usually do the budget for graduation later in the year and then come up with that fee later in the year.
Right, and maybe you could include a little asterisk saying this does not include graduation
Sure.
costs.
Yep.
Now that yeah, no, I respect that need for flexibility. Yeah, it'd just be great if we got this money not through fees. CPS just gave us, and then we'd still charge fees. There's never enough money.
I'm
Okay.
totally open and love hearing parent feedback. I don't know if Ms. Deely or Ms. Criswell have more that they want to chime in about, but that's the biggest drive of how we change this form to make it more user-friendly or communicative to the parents, because they're really the ones who see it. Our staff don't see, I mean, they can see it, but they have no use for it, or it's not important to them. So it needs to be clear and concise and understandable to all the students and the parents especially.
Okay, and I know it's really late, so we can definitely wrap it up. I guess, what are you going to present, you know, like okay, so the LSC meeting is next Tuesday, and it would be great, is it next? Yeah, and it would be great for them to get the information that you're going to present in advance so they can look at it and get their questions in order. What are you planning to present to them?
So Dr. Powers, I think I'm deferring to you, correct?
What we're going to be doing is going through the budget. Again, we're hoping we have all of our ducks in a row, I guess you might say. And part of that is dependent on the information we can get. But by the time we have our meeting next Tuesday, we hope to have our entire budget layout and be able to answer questions with regard to specific actions we're taking to close the gap, especially, and how we're allocating the resources. There will be some differences. Now, if we do, and I wanted to emphasize this, if there's an interest in or a strong desire to know more specifically, the who, in other words, which positions are involved, those are personnel issues that are going to have to go into a closed session. We could potentially do that as part of the LSC meeting, or we could do it potentially as an additional, and I hate to call for an additional meeting, but an additional budget committee meeting later this week. If we have the answers to some of these things, then we could provide you, if it's a closed meeting, we could provide you with more specifics. If not, we'll just kind of go with the more generic labeling that we've had so far, which is typically what we've done in the past. Even closing positions, those things aren't announced until the end of the school year anyway. When displacement letters go out, it's just that we very seldom have had to do that. And we're hoping we will still not have to do that, at least not on a widespread basis.
Okay, yeah, I think that I don't, unless something major happens, I don't see a need to have another budget committee meeting. Because I feel like the council, it will be the full council that will need to have the information. So, unless something life-changing happens. And we might need if this is due May 20th, the budget, so if we can't finish it all next Tuesday, or you get more information, or you want to wait, we can always call a meeting May 19th, and
exactly.
that, yeah, for sure. And that's usually my experience.
We've normally been able to do it in the one meeting, and having the committee meeting like this, I think helps, lay the groundwork, for what we do next week at the general meeting.
Great. I do too. I appreciate your time, and I realize we're over time. So if we don't have any other business, if anyone doesn't have any other comment, I would adjourn the meeting at 4:46.
Thank you all very much.
Oh, okay. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.